By 1945, the German surface fleet was a shadow of its former self. Its battleships and single aircraft carrier, once the symbols of a grand naval strategy, were scattered across the crumbling fronts of Europe. Some remained afloat, others were abandoned, and many were barely holding together. The war had ended, but for these vessels, the final chapter was just beginning. In January 1939, Admiral Erich Raeder proposed Plan Z to Adolf Hitler. It was a massive expansion designed to challenge the British Royal Navy by 1945. The blueprint included 10 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 15 armored cruisers, and more than 200 U-boats. The projected cost was 33 billion Reichsmarks, requiring 6 years of peace to complete. However, Plan Z relied on the assumption that war with Britain would not occur until the mid-1940s. When conflict erupted in September 1939, the project was less than 20% finished. Only 4 battleships were ready for service. The carrier Graf Zeppelin remained incomplete. As resources shifted to submarine production, Plan Z died before it truly lived. Forcing Germany's surface fleet into a war it was never built to win. Of the 4 battleships that saw action, Bismarck would be the first to demonstrate German naval power and the first to be destroyed. The combat career of the Bismarck lasted only 8 days, yet in that short time she cost the Royal Navy one of its most iconic ships, and forced Britain to deploy almost every available asset. In the Atlantic, to hunt her down, the mission Operation Rheinübung began on May 18, 1941. Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen departed Gotenhafen for the Atlantic. British intelligence spotted them immediately, and the Royal Navy scrambled to intercept. On May 24th, in the Denmark Strait, the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the battleship HMS Prince of Wales engaged the German ships. At 5:52 a.m., fire was exchanged at a range of nearly 13 miles. Moments later, Bismarck's 5th salvo detonated Hood's aft magazine. The British ship exploded and split in two, sinking in just 3 minutes. Out of a crew of 418, only 3 survived. The loss devastated Britain. The Hood had been the pride of the Royal Navy for 20 years. Prime Minister Winston Churchill issued a direct command: sink the Bismarck. However, Bismarck was also wounded. Hits from the Prince of Wales had ruptured her forward fuel tanks, forcing her to limp toward occupied France. For 2 days, British cruisers tracked her while the rest of the fleet closed in. On May 26th, Swordfish torpedo bombers from HMS Ark Royal attacked. A single torpedo jammed Bismarck's rudders, trapping her in a helpless circle. That night, Admiral Gunther Lütjens messaged Berlin, "Ship unmaneuverable, we shall fight to the last shell." The end came on the morning of May 27th. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney pulverized the German battleship for nearly 2 hours. By 10:15 a.m., she was a burning wreck, whether scuttled or sunk by damage. Bismarck capsized at 10:40 a.m., taking over 2 to 100 men to the bottom. Only 115 were rescued. Robert Ballard found the wreck in 1989. She sits upright at a depth of 15,700 feet, 470 miles west of Brest, her hull still largely intact. With Bismarck gone, 3 battleships remained: Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Tirpitz. Their fates would be very different. Scharnhorst initially found success during Operation Berlin in early 1941. She and her sister ship Gneisenau sank 22 Allied merchant vessels. After surviving a year of bombing in Brest, they executed the famous Channel Dash in February 1942, escaping back to Germany in broad daylight. But this was a strategic retreat. The German surface fleet would never dominate the Atlantic again. In March 1943, Scharnhorst moved to Norway to target Arctic convoys. On Christmas Day 1943, she sortied to intercept an Allied transport, but walked into a trap. The battleship HMS Duke of York was waiting. The Battle of North Cape was fought in freezing darkness. Duke of York's radar-guided gunfire crippled Scharnhorst, allowing destroyers to finish her with torpedoes. At 7:45 p.m. on December 26, she capsized and sank. Of her crew of nearly 1,900, only 36 survived the icy waters. Gneisenau never saw combat again. After the Channel Dash, she was bombed by the RAF while in dry dock at Kiel on February 26, 1942. A bomb ignited her forward magazine, destroying the bow plans to repair and upgrade her guns. To match the Bismarck began in 1942, but were halted in January 1943, when Hitler ordered the surface fleet scrapped. Her guns were repurposed for coastal defense and her hull sat idle in Gotenhafen. As the Soviets approached in March 1945, she was towed to the harbor entrance and scuttled as a block ship Poland later raised and scrapped the wreck in 1951, with some steel reportedly recycled into merchant ships. Tirpitz rarely fired her guns in anger. She functioned as a fleet in being, tying down massive British naval resources simply by anchoring in Norwegian fjords. The Royal Navy kept capital ships in Scotland. Just to counter her potential movements, the British attacked her relentlessly. In September 1943, midget submarines from Operation Source mined her hull, causing permanent damage to her engines. She would never be fully operational again. In October 1944, she was moved to Tromsø. On November 12, the RAF launched a final attack, with 29 Lancaster bombers carrying 12,000-pound tallboy bombs. At 9:41 a.m., 2 direct hits devastated the ship. One pierced the armored deck, the other triggered a massive internal explosion. Tirpitz capsized at 10:40 a.m., trapping over 900 men. The wreck remained visible until it was dismantled in the late 1940s. Prince Eugen was the survivor. Having fought alongside Bismarck and survived the Channel Dash, she ended the war supporting the retreat in the Baltic surrendered to the British and then transferred to the U.S. Navy. She was commissioned as the USS Prince Eugen and towed to Bikini Atoll for nuclear testing. In July 1946, she survived both the Able airburst and Baker underwater atomic tests. Though still afloat, she was too radioactive to repair, towed to Kwajalein Atoll. She capsized in shallow water on December 22, 1946. Her wreck remains there today. The pocket battleships Admiral Scheer and Lutzow were built for commerce, raiding fast enough to escape battleships strong enough to crush cruisers. Admiral Scheer was the most successful raider, sinking over 113,000 tons of shipping between 1940 and 1941. By 1943, however, she was relegated to training and coastal support. On April 9, 1945, RAF bombers capsized her at the dock in Kiel. The wreck was eventually buried under post-war rubble. Lutzow, originally named Deutschland, had a harder war, spending much of it under repair. In April 1945, a tallboy bomb tore open her hull at Swinemünde. She sank in shallow water, but continued to provide fire support against Soviet troops until May 4th. The Soviets later raised her for weapons testing, and finally sank her in July 1947. Finally, the Graf Zeppelin symbolized Germany's failed naval ambition. Laid down in 1936, the aircraft carrier was 80% complete when war began. However, Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring refused to supply planes. And Admiral Rader's pleas for resources went unanswered. Work stopped in 1940, resumed briefly in 1942, and halted forever in 1943, scuttled in the Oder River. In April 1945, the carrier was raised by the Soviets in 1946. In August 1947, she was used for target practice, enduring bombs and torpedoes before finally sinking. Her wreck was located off the coast of Poland in 2006. Thanks for watching. Like this video,